The first thing that hit me was the smell. Iron and wet wool and something sweeter underneath like spilled tea gone sour. It pried open my chest the way cold hands pry open a window in winter. One step through the kitchen door and the whole house folded itself into that smell. The damp root of the old well, the lemon oil on the scuffed table, a breath of perfume that could have been my daughter's or any woman's who had memorized the curve of morning light. I had brought the farm in my old pickup, keys tied to a ribbon, my hands still smelling of oil and metal. I had imagined people running out laughing, my daughter throwing herself into my arms. The small triumph of giving her something that had once meant the world to me. Instead, the house was small with absence, and in the back room I found her kneeling on the floor, her face half buried in the hem of a sweater, shoulders heaving like an animal that had run until it forgot the way home. She didn't look up when I closed the door. Her hair had come down, the braid I remembered from childhood undone and falling in messy dark ropes, and there were wet crescents on her cheeks. Her hands were clasped around something invisible, or around the idea of something gone. When she finally looked at me, it was not with welcome but with a plea that didn't fit her face. "Please don't make it worse. We thought you were not coming until Sunday," said a voice from the doorway, thin, tight, practiced civility that tasted of a dozen family dinners given through gritted teeth. Mrs. Hargreave. Her linen dress starched to affrontation, hands folded like a prayer that had long ago been swallowed by habit. She was my daughter's mother-in-law, queen of the porch and keeper of the ironed napkins. Behind her, her husband stood like another shadow, broad shoulders softened by a cardigan but with an expression that could cut wood. Inside me something bristled. I cleared my throat the way men who have been silenced for a long time do before they speak. My voice was smaller than I had primed it to be. "I brought the keys." At the word keys the daughter, Anna, made a sound like a laugh and a sob tangled together. She pushed herself up slowly. "Dad," she said, like a question you ask at the edge of a cliff. Her husband, Mark, shifted his weight, finally moved. His face went blank as a stage after the curtain falls. "You shouldn't have come," he said antiseptically. "We were going to talk about everything when later." "You were going to do what?" The question was a match struck in a dry room. I had worked for 30 years and pulled every weekend into the soil to do this for them. The deed was signed in my head. A simple gift free of gossip and ledgers. The keys were supposed to make it real. Instead they flashed like a lie between us. They said nothing, which felt to me like the worst answer. The silence was a roomful of small things I couldn't yet name. A missing mug on the windowsill, a jacket thrown over the banister that had not been there before. Anna's hands were cold when she took the keys from me. Her fingers trembled and there was a slight red in the soft web where her ring sat, new metal pressed into skin. We sat. The kitchen clock ticked with a small, indifferent accuracy. The in-laws recited platitudes about being grateful and careful and inviting us to dinner next week. Those were the words people with appliances use when they want to disguise the fact that they are sharpening knives. Mark's jaw worked when he smiled. He said nothing that was not debated and approved in other rooms. Anna's eyes watched him like a lighthouse watching a storm. "We can't keep up with the taxes," Mr. Hargreave said finally, folding his hands as if to put them on a Bible. "It's a bigger place then." His voice softened into the arithmetic of ownership. "We thought it would be better if..." Anna's laugh was a sound like a snapped wire. "You thought what? You thought you could manage it? You thought you could take everything I have and make it tidy?" Her voice was a thread pulled out so quick it might unravel the whole fabric of the evening. They looked at each other, and in that glance something ancient passed. The comfort of people who have watched a plan unfold and measured the cost. There were excuses then. Market predictions, better connections, farm hands that could be hired, the promise of investment, but what lay underneath them was colder. Ownership as conquest. I watched my daughter listlessly accept that language, as if she expected it to smooth her, to make the ache in her chest less jagged. I should have stopped there. I should have demanded answers and names. Instead, I felt that old parental compulsion to repair, to stitch wounds into something that would not bleed in the house where my granddaughter would play. "Anna, we can figure this out," I said. My voice sounded like someone who has rehearsed comforting lines to a child in a thunderstorm. "We can keep the legal things." "No," she said, and for a moment she was a small girl again, refusing to go to the neighbor's party because she didn't want to pretend. "Dad, this isn't about taxes. It was in the way she said it that the first real needle went into my chest. The subtle shift to protectiveness in her voice. Her hands closed on the keys until her knuckles blanched. "He's been gone a lot," she said finally, like someone opening a letter that admits everything. "He goes away for work. He says he's at the co-op, he says he's at the market. He says he's managing something." "I work long hours," Mark said. His hands were large and steady farmer hands that had once held a plow as if it had been a part of him. "You know how harvest is." Anna's laugh then was not a laugh but a knife. "Long hours," she repeated. "Long hours and long texts at night and a car that smells like someone else's perfume." That phrase, "someone else's perfume," detonated something in me. I looked at Mark and for the first time there was a shadow under his eyes that had nothing to do with work. There was a drawer unlatched in me where 1,000 small doubts had been stored. Missed birthdays, money that had been subtly reorganized, promises that had been met with a careful forgetfulness. I felt foolish for not seeing the pattern, more foolish because my heart had wanted to be absolutely confident. In the corner of the kitchen, the radio played low. A soap singer crooned about trust in a voice too clear for the evening. "I saw her number on his phone," Anna said, the admission like a stone placed on a quiet pond. I didn't mean to look. I just..." Her fingers fumbled with the air as if she could find the missing piece and put it back. It was the same name he said he'd never use. It wasn't a business number. Mr. Hargreave cleared his throat. It could be someone from the market. You know how Mark talks to suppliers. It wasn't suppliers, Anna said. It was pictures. He had pictures. My mind, which had been steady with plans of fresh-turned soil and fence posts, started to tumble. I had always wanted to be the kind of father who could fix things. Broken trucks, broken hearts, broken lists. But this felt like a machine that had been intentionally misassembled. The picture Anna described was not blur of bodies at the end of a blind drunk night. It was intimacy captured in the light of a cheap camera, two bodies close, laughter softened into the kind of familiarity that told me they had been practicing being lovers for a long time. "You should have shown me the phone," I said stupidly, needing a place for rage to land. "We should look." Anna's eyes were full of a complicated tenderness that made me swell with pride and hollow with fear. "I did," she said. "But he deleted things when I wasn't looking. And then a week ago there was lipstick on his collar. And I found a receipt." "What receipt?" I asked. "For the Linden Inn," Anna said. 2 rooms. The dates line up with when he said he's been at the market. The Linden Inn. I had driven past it once. A place with lace curtains and a sign that leaned like a confession. My chest felt like an axe had bitten a groove into it. "Where is this receipt?" I asked, already imagining the paper's edges like a map to a betrayal. She dug into her sweater and produced something folded small and worn. A napkin, a receipt. There was coffee ring on it and a lipstick smudge so fresh it looked like a cut on white. He said he was tired and left the receipt on the truck. I thought maybe it was nothing. Mr. Hargreaves' mouth was a thin straight line. Mrs. Hargreaves' fingers found her husband's sleeve in a tiny ownership gesture. "Anna, this is a marriage," she said. "You can't go tearing it apart over a napkin. Men make mistakes." Her words created a line between them and me. I saw then not only the husband who might have betrayed my daughter but a whole family that had chosen its side. They folded themselves into the geometry of protection around their son, the same way wolves encircle a young one. In their eyes, Anna's pain was a disruption to be managed, contained, and cleverly explained away. Heartlessness had a quiet, domesticated voice, and it used phrases like mistake and forgive the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. "I didn't realize," I said to nobody and everybody, because strangers had been the architects of this new arrangement. I felt my breath cut short. I wanted to pick up the keys and throw them at the wall, set the whole parcel of earth on fire. But fury, I have learned, can be both a blowtorch and an anesthetic. I needed to see, to confirm, to make the betrayal into something that could be touched and weighed. Anna looked at me then, and I saw all the ways she had resembled me. The stubborn set of her jaw, the tendency to hold her tongue until the right blade of truth was available. "Please, Dad," she whispered, and the plea took the whole room with it. "Please don't do anything stupid." I wanted to promise I wouldn't. I wanted to promise that I would protect her by force if I had to, that I would tear the bedsheets out of the Linden Inn like flags of an outrage. Instead, I felt my hands go clammy and small around the keys. The gift that had been wrapped in my head for months, the idea of the farm as a place of future harvests and grandchildren's laughter, suddenly shuddered like a boat with a leak. The legal paper I had signed that morning crawled into my mind. My name, the ink, the notary's stamp. It felt like a contract with the wrong god. I left the kitchen to the adults prattling for control and walked outside because the night had the raw honesty of wind. Out on the porch, the moon looked like a single eye and the air held the distant hum of the road. I kept thinking of the photo Anna had described and of the napkin with lipstick, pieces of a puzzle that could become an answer if I collected them. I thought of how betrayal had a way of collecting in small things. A coffee ring, a careless text message, a forgotten receipt, until it was a mountain. I drove to the Linden Inn without meaning to. My hands steered with the certainty of an animal following scent. The sign was lit by a single bulb that blinked like the pulse of someone nervous and secretive. I parked a little way off and watched the windows with the focused attention of a man who has learned that sometimes the truth is physical. A figure leaving at dusk, a car backed into the gravel. Nothing lurched into view. The inn was quiet as a held breath. On the front porch of my pickup, the keys heavy and cold in my palm, I had the first clear, naked thought of my life as something that could be taken away. I had imagined giving the farm to my daughter as a solution. I had not imagined it as the pivot around which a betrayal might spin. The thought was quick and awful. What if the farm would be the thing that tied her to a lie? I went back to the house because I could not leave her alone in the dark with people who had already decided things about her pain. Anna was sitting on the edge of the bed, knees drawn up, the keys in her lap like a small, tremulous island. When she saw me, she leaned forward as if to check whether I was real. Her hand found mine and the touch was a little anchor. "Dad," she said, that single syllable heavy enough to topple a man. I wanted to be the person she deserved, the one who would take her by the shoulders and ask the right questions. Instead, I realized with a kind of sick precision that I knew only the shape of the problem, not the full anatomy of it. Betrayal was not a single event but a slow, accumulating rot. It had fans in the house, it had rooting in the pockets of people who thought themselves entitled. There would be more to find. There always is. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow we find out." She nodded, but I could tell she did not believe me. And as sleep edged toward the house, I understood that the farm, my gift, had become the fulcrum for unspooling a life I thought I'd helped build. The keys were still warm in my hand. I could feel the weight of them like a verdict. Morning came with the dry, mechanical chirp of a rooster that my body no longer needed. The dew on the fields was silver and perfect, a beauty so indifferent it made your lungs ache. I sat at the kitchen table and watched Mark pour coffee with hands that trembled slightly now that the easy lie had been punctured. The in-laws were careful with their plates, eyes always skimming for advantage. It was a family practiced at negotiation. I asked to see Mark's truck. He blinked as if surprised by the request. "Why?" he asked. "It's just because the receipt was for the Linden Inn," I said. "And you said you were at the co-op. I want to see the truck." There are ways men look when they think they are about to be reasonable and ways they look when they think they might be caught. His face moved between both. "What do you expect to find?" he asked. His voice was small and slippery. "What happens to be in the truck is nothing," Anna said quietly. "I expect to find the truth. If he's been lying, I want to know." So we went out and opened the truck's bed. There were sacks of feed, a tie-down rope, the smell of the road baked into the rubber mat. I opened the glove compartment because my hands were heavy with a fear that had muscle memory. There it was. A receipt for 2 rooms at the Linden Inn, dated the same weekend Mark had told Anna he was away at the co-op. Under it, a smear of lipstick. Beside it, a folded photograph. My heart exploded in slow motion. In the photo, Mark and a woman were seated close on a bench under a lamp, their faces turned into each other with a softness that belonged only to people not thinking about reputations. The woman's hair was cropped in a style I knew, the same cut as Mrs. Hargreaves' youngest daughter, Melanie. She was not my daughter. She was a part of the family orbit. Niece and neighbor and someone whose name had been at our house for cake and polite conversation. If intimacy is a flame, this photograph was a match struck under a dry roof. I remember at that moment the world condensing into a single point. The hot, sharp awareness that the betrayal was not an accident, but a wound shared by several hands. Mark laughed when I held the photograph up, but it was a brittle, useless laugh. "It's not what it looks like," he said. "It looks like a man and a woman who are not afraid to be seen in each other's arms," Anna said, voice low like a stone dropped in a well. Melanie's eyes, when we confronted her, were small and feral. She did not deny it. She said something about being lonely, about Mark listening to her in ways other men hadn't, and when Mrs. Hargreave took her side I felt my skin slide away from my bones. The in-laws' mercy had the texture of arithmetic. The family must be preserved, the family must go on. Sacrifice is a currency you pay to buy a quieter life. They suggested counseling, they suggested time. They suggested that Anna should manage the situation for the children. As the details spilled out, secret gatherings at the co-op after hours, texts in code, a necklace Mark had hidden and then lied about, something worse unfurled under it all. Melanie was not simply Mark's lover. She had been given a job at a neighboring property by Mr. Hargreave. She had been shipped errands and car rides under the pretense of favor. There was a pattern of placing people, of making seams in the family seamstress and then pulling at them until things tore. The in-laws, who presented themselves as pillars of propriety, were the ones who had cut the threads. The discovery made my anger simple and ferocious. I wanted to drag them all outside and make them name what they had done. I wanted to break the chairs and call the police and call friends and burn things down. But what burned through me was something subtler. A grief that settled like a slow rot. Betrayal did not just wreck a marriage, it remade a system. If Mark and Melanie were lovers, they were also actors in a play orchestrated by an older, calmer hand. The hand of the Hargreaves who had eyes for the farm's potential, and who had already tasted the yield of persuasion. "You've been using her all along," I told Mrs. Hargreave, the words hot and unfair and maybe true. "You've been arranging this." She looked at me like an offended matron. "We've been helping," she said. "We help people find their way. Melanie is family. Mark has needs and we listen." We stood there, a ring of accusation smaller than a throat. Anna pressed a palm to her mouth, and I could see her decide what to say like someone choosing a blade from a set. "You helped because you wanted the farm," she said finally. "Because if Mark is tied to Melanie, then she owes loyalty. You wanted the paperwork to sit pretty under a son-in-law who would sign away the deed." Mrs. Hargreave's face hardened. "That's a lot of imagination." But there was more. Later, when Anna and I stayed up under the low hum of the kitchen light, she produced a manila envelope from the back of a drawer. Inside were emails, messages from an old address I recognized as Mr. Hargreave's business account, correspondence with a law firm. The tone of the emails was not the brittle politeness of neighbors, but the blunt negotiation of ownership. They discussed timelines and contingencies, and at one point, a phrase that made me want to sit down. Contingency in the event of marital instability. Betrayal had a scaffolding. Someone had drawn the lines for where the farm would be most easily acquired. They had planted a girl named Melanie where she could be useful. They had watched Mark and nudged him toward comfort. All of it was administration and cunning disguised as domestic devotion. The in-laws were not simply heartless. They were architects of a plan that required a broken marriage. I felt sick in my mouth. There was a cruelty to the precision of it that made me think of tools boxed and kept sharp. "Why didn't you leave him?" I asked Anna in the dark, though I understood the question had no easy answer. Love and fear and practicalities and the way a child's life grows like a root across a spouse's identity. These things make leaving a complicated calculus. She had tried. She had asked for more honesty, for different arrangements, and each time the family smoothed over the squeak with platitudes and small sins. "I stayed because I wanted to believe that the boy I married was the man I knew," she said. "Because I had been raised to keep the covenant. Because leaving felt like failing at everything my father taught me." Her voice broke. "And because sometimes, Dad, you love someone so much you keep accepting these small deceptions until one day you wake up, and they're all that's left. There's a particular kind of fury that comes from watching your child's belief in goodness be deconstructed. I had given them the farm to plant a future, not to furnish a trap. It felt obscene. The law might be complex and the deed might be signed, but there was a raw ledger being kept in the rooms of our hearts. Hargreaves can twist any story to their favor," Mr. Hargreaves said coldly when I confronted him. "You are willing to hand over property based on emotion. You gave it to her in the first place without thinking of consequences. You asked me to think of consequences for me, I snapped. The words were a litany and a confession at once. Because I had thought of nothing but hope. Because sometimes hope is a kind of blindness. You built the consequences. The house smelled like rain and coffee and secondhand grief. In the weeks that followed there were arguments and lawyers' letters and sleepless nights. Mark apologized, sometimes with candor and other times with the dull evasions of a man trying to avoid becoming smaller in his own eyes. Melanie left town for a while. Then she came back with new resolve, cleaned of the old scruples. The Hargreaves negotiated until they held certain things dear and certain things promised. Anna, when the fury had passed, was transformed into a careful and dangerous thing. She was someone who had learned the geometry of betrayal and would, if necessary, learn its law. The crescendo came not with screams but with a single piece of paper. Among the council's letters, one document, thin with a notary's stamp, revealed a clause in the deed I had thought I signed with the breeziness of a man who loved his daughter. A survivorship provision that meant ownership would pass to the spouse in the event of my death. I had signed it in a moment of faith, not malice, but that little legal hinge meant the farm could be siphoned if I died without revising that clause. The Hargreaves had apparently noticed the vulnerability. They had not broken any public law. They had worked inside the smaller chambers of human contracts. I sat with that knowledge until my hands ached. There was a terrible clearness in understanding that the easier route, just trusting, had been rendered by cruel hands into a vulnerability. If I wanted to protect my daughter, I would have to stop being romantic about my gesture. I would have to become legalistic and stubborn and unromantic the way a man defends his last right. So I did something else, something that felt like a betrayal both to myself and to the system I'd grown up in. I called an old friend. A woman who understood deeds and counters and the math of family law. I had thought of making the farm a gift because I believed in the slow, redemptive power of soil. I did not realize I was giving it away into a machine that chewed up the trusting. My friend helped me draw a new document. It would not be pretty. It would not be sentimental. It named conditions, it required signatures. It established a trust that would protect Anna's right to the house and land, but also set clear boundaries against sale or transfer without consent. It called for an independent trustee, a neutral party, someone who would not be seduced by family alliances. The paperwork was not a bandage. It was a small fortress. When I presented it, the Hargreaves were furious in a way that revealed the scale of their intent. "You're undermining family," Mrs. Hargreaves said as if she had been discovered in prayer. "You're turning your daughter into a stranger." "What I'm doing," I said, "is keeping the thing I loved from being taken by people who believe family is a tool." Anna looked at the papers and then at me, eyes bright with something like relief and something like grief. "You did this for me?" she whispered. "You could have let me fight. I could have crawled away and let the world take what it wanted," I said. "But I couldn't." The Hargreaves left that night with their dignity like a cloak they could not quite fix. They had not broken laws, but they had tested the seams of loyalty and found them wanting. They had exposed how easily a marriage could be weaponized. They had shown me that heartlessness was not unfeelingness. It was strategic. A month later Anna and Mark separated quietly, with the patience of people who have to safeguard children. It was not a neat split. Forgiveness is neither linear nor fair. Melanie left for a city job and sent an indifferent postcard that made Anna laugh and then cry. The in-laws came around for holidays with controlled smiles. They played the long game but the fortress held. There was for me another cost. In protecting the farm from being used as currency, I had turned it into a kind of prison. The trust limited what could be done with the land. It required stewardship and transparency. I could have given a gift of unbounded trust, but I had seen what trust could do to those who took it for granted. The farm became an emblem of a lesson I had learned late. Generosity without vigilance can be a kindness to wrong hands. We planted the spring corn together, side by side, like people trying to stitch themselves back together with seed and soil. Anna laughed at small things and then flinched at larger ones. She went to therapy and told me things I had not wanted to hear about the small betrayals that lived before the big ones. She learned to set boundaries. I watched her, often from the porch, and I thought about the keys in my pocket and the way they felt heavier now. Not because they were laden with ownership but because they were the beginning of a new promise. The twist that folded itself into the end of this whole mess was not cinematic in the way gossip wants. It wasn't a public unmasking or a dramatic courtroom confession. The real twist was quieter and worse. Heartless people can be strategic, and strategy wins more often than romance. That knowledge stayed in my mouth like an unpleasant taste. But there was another stranger turn. One evening as we sat with the children, Mark, looking smaller and more human than the man who had hidden receipts, came to me and said, "I'm sorry." He meant it in a way that a man can when he has to wear his shame in public. He had been unfaithful, that was clear. He had also been manipulated by love, and by the misguided kindness of those who thought they were engineering destiny. Anna listened, and when she spoke it was with a cool, terrible clarity that had been carved by experience. "You hurt me," she said. "And you hurt us. But I also see that some people built the trap and some people fell into it. That doesn't make me blind to who did what wrong. It makes me decide what I will carry and what I will not." She forgave him in part, not because she excused him but because she had decided the story of her life would not be only an inventory of injuries. She did not take him back fully. She made a new arrangement that protected herself and their children. The Hargreaves, humbled and rebuked by their own small miscalculation, left their ambitions in the dust of the road. When spring turned to summer and the corn grew tall and honest, there were mornings I would walk the fields and think of the keys in my pocket. In the end, the farm remained ours. Not as a gift poured out blindly, but as something guarded by a useful, necessary mistrust. We had learned that love without boundaries can be plank and rope ready to snap. We learned that betrayal often comes dressed in the gentlest cardigan. It was not the ending I had once imagined. No triumphant embrace with the whole family gathered, no tidy reconciliation served like pie. Instead, the ending was messy and true. There was damage that would not heal cleanly. There were scars on the bedposts and the kitchen table, and in the gentle way Anna looked at Mark when she passed him in the barn. But there was also a stubborn kind of beauty in the way the soil accepted our hands again, in the way small children chased each other past the fence, in the stubbornness of life choosing to sprout even after it had been nearly choked by the intentions of others. The last thing I did that summer before the lease on the tractor ran out was to take Anna's hand, keys in my pocket, and walk to the old maple that marked the property line. We stood underneath it and listened to the wind make the leaves speak in sibilant counsel. "I wanted this to just be simple for you," I told her, and the truth tasted like smoke and rain. "I wanted to give without cost. You gave me something more complicated," she said, fingers finding mine. "You gave me a problem to solve." "And you solved it," I said. We both knew the word solve did not mean clean. It meant made survivable, made ours again. She squeezed my hand and for a moment the sun broke through the maple's leaves in a way that made dust look like gold. Betrayal had been a teacher, cold and relentless, but its lessons had not turned us to stone. They had made us careful, harder in some places, gentler in others. I kept the keys in a drawer after that, not as a trophy but as a reminder. You can give a gift with an open heart, but you must also be willing to build walls that keep the gift from being turned into a weapon. The farm was still mine to walk through, sometimes a place of stubborn weeds and sometimes a place of harvest. It held the memory of pain and the promise of seed. It was, in other words, utterly human, and for the first time in a long time that felt enough.